Did you know that you could use directional fabrics in more 3-yard quilts than you thought? Let me show you what I did. Hi, it's Hannah with Fabric Cafe, and welcome back to another episode of What Quilting Taught Me. This is a series we do where I show you quilts that I have made and how I changed the pattern up or any mistakes that I made and how I got over those mistakes and fixed them. So today we're going to take a look at how I made a directional fabric work where it shouldn't work. I'm going to teach you how to do that and also tell you about a few improvisations that I had to make in the process. So let's check out the quilts. This is our Tic Tac pattern, and this is from our book Easy Peasy. Now, this is a quilt that I made for my nephew Michael for his birthday last year. My sister said she was going to show this to him, so hi Michael! Thank you for letting me share your quilt with everyone. So I chose fireman for it because his birthday was a fireman theme, and I thought that that was just perfect. I chose Tic Tac for it because I wanted to show off 2 big prints. And I really like showing off big prints with Tic Tac because I like this sashing right here with this little breakup, because I like that it has a lot more texture and it kind of gives a lot of movement throughout the quilt and a lot of interest. And you can see that I used more than 3 fabrics. Normally, this fabric, your number 2, is what goes in these little peekaboos. But I didn't want to cut up my little fireman, so I decided, let's throw in a 4th fabric. And I really liked this stripe going with it because it has a lot of movement and it's out here on the binding, which I love a stripe on a border or a binding. So I think it turned out so cute. Now let's put it on the table and take a closer look at this fabric. So like I said, this is our Tic Tac pattern, and that is from our Easy Peasy book. There are 8 total patterns in this book, including our Tic Tac, and all of the patterns are written for a lap, a twin, and a king queen. So it's a really great deal to get the book. You have so many options, which I love. Let's take a look at what it looks like in the traditional 3-yard quilt pattern way. So first we have this adorable fabric, and we were able to get fabric that was from the same line as mine. So it's not exact, but it's pretty close. So we have our little firemen, and we've got the little dogs and some different words and tools that I use. And that's going to go everywhere you see this blue, the dark blue background. Then our number 2 fabric are all these different words. You can see they've got all of them in different colors. And I like that it's on a white background because this is going to be our number 2, which is everywhere you see this. And it's going to peek out in these little peekaboos right here in your sashing. And I think that's really just going to add a nice pop right there. It'll brighten it up a lot in that sashing strip. Then we actually have the same stripe that I used, which I love. So instead of just being in these peekaboos, this is going to be everywhere you see this red and on the binding. I really like a stripe on a binding or a sashing because it's going to really frame your blocks. Everywhere this red is, it's going to be going doot 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 or doot 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 and framing into the block, which really adds a lot of movement, a lot of texture, and I like that it picks up all of these different colors. You can see all of these are picked up from the words and our stripe, as well as in our number 1 with our red. I think it's going to turn out so cute. You can see on the screen how that red and that white are framed by that stripe with all of those bright colors popping off, and that black adds just a nice grounding effect to really frame out those other 2 fabrics. If you're interested in this fabric, you can get it at fabriccafe.com. The kit name is Rescue Team, using the Tic Tac pattern from the Easy Peasy book. So let's compare it to mine and see what I did differently. So you can see that I have 4 fabrics. I used a big print for my number 1 and my number 2, but I felt that my number 2 fabric was too large to be put in those little squares. I just didn't like the idea of cutting up those fire trucks so much. So I just thought, you know, let's add in a 4th fabric. And that's where that stripe came in. And I liked that it picked up all of the colors that are in both of the fabrics and adds that nice contrast with the red. Now my number 2 fabric, that light blue with the fire trucks, that is actually a directional fabric. And this pattern does not traditionally work with directional fabrics. And I encountered this while I was making it. So I'm going to tell you how I fixed my problem and give you an idea on how to avoid that in the future for yourself. All right, so first I'm gonna show you in the book how this quilt is constructed and show you where I went wrong. First off, we have 3 different blocks, and our rows are built vertically or in columns, depending on what your preference is. So first we have this double sashed block, which doesn't matter, you can use directional fabric because it doesn't matter which way you turn it. It's gonna be right. You can always make it face the right direction. Then our number 2 block, our unit B, that's just a square. And those are great because you can definitely make that face whatever direction you need. You just gotta make sure you lay it in right. And then it has another sashed block with the double, so we're all hunky-dory. And then we have our unit C, and that only has that sashing right on the bottom. This is where we're gonna get into some trouble. This works just fine on 2 of your columns. So here we have our double sashed block. You can see it right here. And then we have our number 2, and this one is just the square. So you can see that double sashing will make the border for this one because we also have our double sashing on this other side. Now, we go all the way down to our bottom, and here you can see we have that block that is just sashed on one side. You have to have this sashing down on the bottom because it finishes that line, and it's right next to one of those doubles so that this will line up right. But when you get to your second column, your middle column, this block gets rotated because you can see up here on the top. So we have our block here, and we need that sashing up at the top so that it can connect. So you see it's next to that double, so that it'll connect with that. And then there's another double on this side, so it makes that through sashing across the whole top. Now I have an additional pieces and parts to show you. So you can't do it like this because there's no sashing at the top, so it would just be blank. And there's a sashing here, so it can't go there. You have to flip it. And then my elephants are on their heads, so that's a problem. I don't want my elephants on their head. And I didn't realize this was a problem until I had all of my blocks laid out. I made all of them. I was laying out the quilt so that I could sew all my columns together. And then I saw, oh, I'm gonna have some firemen on their heads. So what I ended up doing, I just seam ripped this off and I sewed it onto the other side so that I could flip it and it would work having this on the top. But there is actually a way that you can look ahead and tweak it before you even get there so you don't have to do any seam ripping. Because I don't know about y'all, but I don't like seam ripping. Not great fun, right? So let's take a closer look at our problem child, which is our strip assembly B right here. To make a strip assembly, what you do is you cut long with the fabric strips, and then you'll cut another with the fabric strip, or more than one, depending on what the pattern calls for, and you just sew them on the long edge right there. And in this one, we actually need some of our blocks to be sewn this way, but we also need some of them to be sewn this way. So let's look at how we do that. I do have to go through a little bit of math, so bear with me. If you're anything like me, you know, I don't like doing that part, but sometimes it is a necessity. We're gonna look back at our pattern, and I'm gonna look at how many blocks I need from this strip assembly. So I need 3 total, and that's gonna go here, here, and here. And this is the one that gets rotated. I'm going to see what my unit size is. A unit is what you cut off of your strip assembly. So you can see here, this is my unit. I'm gonna see how many I need that look like this, and how many I need where it's reversed with that darker fabric up at the top. So I need 2 of it in the regular way, and then I need 1 where it's sewn opposite. I'm gonna take my 2, add their unit sizes together to see what my grand total is for that. Then I'm gonna do the same thing for my top one, which is super easy because it's just 1. So you just look over here and you say, oh, okay, I gotta cut 1 of those. That's all you have to do for the first one. Now we're gonna go over to our cutting instructions, and I'm gonna see what I need to cut these at. This tells me to cut 1 long with the fabric strip for my fabric number 2, and then it tells me to cut it down a little. Now we often do this because we use it for partial strip assemblies or border extensions, binding extensions. because these are economy quilts and we want you to get every last bit out of that fabric that you can. In this case, we don't actually use this fabric anywhere else. I can look at my cutting instructions and it doesn't tell me to continue cutting it down. I could keep that full with the fabric strip with just a little extra room. Double check on my fabric 3 that it's the same way. We're hunky-dory, we're good to go. So we get to keep that long. So we can keep the whole 44, 45 inch with the fabric, which just makes me a little more comfortable. You know, you can square up your blocks. Now, you do need to double check that you have enough fabric to get all of the blocks if you start cutting things differently. So just take that final number, add all of the blocks that you need together, and see how much total you're gonna need. Make sure that you have plenty in your, with the fabric or whatever it is you're cutting for your strip assembly. And if you have plenty, you can start playing around. I had a little bit of extra, so I could cut myself a little bit extra for my strip assemblies. Let me show you what I did. Here I have my strip assembly B made the normal way. What I did is I cut a couple inches longer than I needed, just so that I had room to square up, and if I made a miscut, it'd be okay. And I sewed a strip the same size on the bottom for my strip assembly. This means I'll be able to cut it into these units right here. And notice I did cut off my selvage. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but this allowed me to cut 2 units out of this strip with a little bit of wiggle room. Now, when I needed to sew it the opposite way, I just took the remaining fabric from that with the fabric strip I cut, I measured that, and then I just cut a strip to match that. And then I sewed it together. And that gives me my opposite one with it sewn at the top, so that I can put it right here, and my elephants or my firemen, whatever you have, are all going the correct direction. Now, this is a method that you can use in lots of different ways. You could use it if you're doing a 4-patch and you want to use directional fabrics, but those units get rotated. Look at your pattern, follow those steps, look at how much you need, and if you can, maybe do 1 strip assembly one direction and 1 strip assembly another way. You just got to do a little bit of math, figure out what your grand totals are, and figure out if you can get all of that from it. But it's really easy when it comes down to it, so you can make basically any pattern work with directional fabric, even if it's not designed to. Earlier I mentioned partial strip assemblies and that I was going to talk to you about the selvage a little. Sometimes in our patterns we do partial strip assemblies because you're going to use the other part of the fabric for something else, like a border extension. I want to give you a word of warning because this is something I did not do. When you're making partial strip assemblies, it'll tell you to cut 1 long strip and then cut off pieces from there. So it might be that you cut a piece for a partial because you don't need a full one to finish the quilt, and then you cut some border pieces out of the rest of it. When you're doing that, do not include your selvage in that measurement that they tell you to cut. Cut that off first and then cut the length that they tell you to cut, or that we tell you to cut. Because sometimes that selvage can really make a difference, and that you don't want that included into your final block. Now, I usually cut off the side that has the text on it. Fabric doesn't always have text on it, but it frequently does. And I will keep this one because there are little, you know, loom dots on there, little parts where you can see the fabric was woven. But it still has print on it, so if you gotta cheat just a little bit, you can hide those in a seam like real easy. I'm telling you all of this because I did not cut off my selvages before I made a partial strip assembly. And I don't think it's the only reason why I ended up in the bind I was in, but it certainly didn't help. So, what ended up happening for me? When I was cutting out my units from my strip assembly A, I did not have quite enough fabric. So what I had to do, I just needed a tiny bit more, and you can see there's a little seam right here. I needed just a little bit more so that I could get my full block size. So what I did because I didn't have enough scraps to sew, you know, another long piece on there, I had to cut little pieces and sew them end to end, and then sew them on the edge of this one. I didn't cut anything exact when I was doing that. I did give some room on the top and bottom and sides. It's like, I'm gonna square it after I finish it. And I think it actually turned out okay. If you just glance at the quilt, you can't really see it. And I did try to kind of line up pieces that were similar to what was next to it, but I think it turned out okay. I've asked many people when I held up the finished quilt, can you see where I messed up? And nobody could see it. Another way to kind of hide that is where you position that block. So if you do have a block that has a little bit something wonky going on, put it towards the bottom of your quilt, because people are gonna look first at the top, and that's what they focus on. So you can hide your little mistakes in the little corners and little bottom parts of the quilt, and people don't see that as much. I'm also gonna tell you about one other thing that I did. My sashing right here, I was using scraps of this stripe whenever I did this, and I didn't have quite enough to cut them the full size that the pattern called for. So what I did is I measured how much fabric I had, how long my strip assembly was for this, since I was just using a scrap. And all I did is I saw how many I needed, and I figured out what the largest size of strip I could get from the fabric that I had. So it's a little bit smaller than what it calls for in the pattern, but it still has that nice big peekaboo, and it really turned out okay. So you have freedom when you make these quilts. If you have little flubs here and there, it's okay. You didn't know just by looking at this if this wasn't quite the right size, and no one's gonna know if they look at yours either. So have fun, explore, get creative, and if you have little mistakes, that's okay. It's quilting. You can do it whatever you want. I sent this to Lucinda, one of our long armors, and she sent me 3 different designs for us to look at. So first off, she sent me one that was called Heat Wave. And this one, as you can see, has like flames going all around, but I like that it's kind of asymmetrical. They're not all in the same area of the quilt, so there's a lot of dynamic movement across it. The second option she sent me is called Labyrinth Bias Cut. And this one I think is really cool because it's kind of geometric, and it's got these strong like angles, but also has soft curves when you get to that angle, which I think is really fun. And I think it sort of reflects the roads and things that are in the #1 fabric. And then the last option is called Malachite. It's a little bit of a variation of that labyrinth one that we just looked at. It also has lots of curls and swirls and things like that, lots of movement. Still looked kind of topographical, like roadways. So what I did is I sent these designs to my sister, the mother of Michael, and we kind of decided together what we thought would look the best. And I mean, we picked flames because we thought that was fun, and what kid doesn't want flames on their fireman quilt? It just sounded fun and cool. So that's the one design we went with. And we also chose to do a blue thread on the front because I liked the way that it kept a little bit of whimsy in it. I thought it kept it more kid-friendly, bright, and fun. And it also picks up on these 2 blues really nicely, so it kind of falls to the back of these blues just a little bit so that you can really see the fabric, but it really pops on the red and the stripe. So it allows you to focus on the fabrics. Lucinda did do something different on the back, so let's look at that. She kept that flame, and she did like a soft yellow thread, which I think was a great decision, because if we had done that blue on the back like the front, it would have been too aggressive. It would have been very in your face. Sometimes that's what you want. In this case, I think it was the right decision to go with kind of a softer one, so you still see that flame and that detail, but it's a little softer. The fire is dying down. My backing fabric that I picked was this yellow swirl. The reason I picked this is because it picked up, I'll try to bend it back so you can see a little. You can see it picks up some of this yellow in the fire truck, and there's a lot of yellow in these blocks, as well as in that stripe. So it was kind of a unifying color, but it was also still really bright. I thought putting red on the back would be a little, again, aggressive. I love the pops of red on here, and I think it really works with that, but I thought it might conflict too much with the front of the quilt. So I decided to go for a really bright and cheerful color. So now I want to take a minute and share a quilt that one of you made. So Valerie sent in this picture, and it is amazing. It is Sweet Times, but she made it with rectangles instead of squares, which I think is so cool. Normally the pattern calls for squares being framed by 2 different colors, but she used rectangles, and I think, if my eyes don't deceive me, that some of those are actually panels. Valerie, if you're watching, let us know. Tell us if those are panels or not. They're so pretty. I think it's such a fun, unique way to use this pattern, and she used more than 3 fabrics. You can see she used multiple fabrics for her sashing, for her middle blocks right there. It looks so good. I love the cohesive watercolor look that she has throughout the whole quilt. If you would like to have one of your quilts featured, then send them to welisten@fabriccafe.com. Our kit that we showed you at the very beginning, those fabrics are both tossed, your number 1 and your number 2. So you don't have to worry about doing what I did. But if you do want to get creative and try to move things around, you definitely can. And a little plug for this Tic Tac pattern, even though I had some issues and I had to improvise a little bit because I miscut or whatever, it still only took me a day to make this quilt. It was really easy and really fast. So that's from our Easy Peasy book if you're interested in that pattern. It's also available as an individual. If you would like to see me make a quilt using charm packs, then be sure to watch the video that pops up. It's Hannah with Fabric Cafe. Happy quilting!